It's Goldfish. Do you like goldfish? Feed them some what fish food? Some kibble. Kibble isn't for goldfish. Hey, what's up? This is a video. We're gonna be doing some musical analysis today. Not of a musical, I'm talking of music like this, like these 4 albums by the group Goldfish. Sometimes it's nice to have a discussion, a more open discussion about music, and sometimes scripts and, you know, that sort of argumentative framework doesn't always work well when you're trying to make a point or trying to talk about something. So today I took some notes. I have some notes down here about Goldfish. I did a full discography analysis, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about what we can learn from Goldfish. We're going to talk about some cool stuff. So that's what this video is. What is Goldfish? Who are Goldfish? You probably never heard of them. They are a South African electronic music group. I would classify them as electro swing. If you're talking about swing from a technical standpoint, it's basically where the division of the beat is uneven. So, like, for example, if you're like having a melody that's like da 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 da, it's like even, right? That's even. That's not swung, right? But swing is like do ba do ba do ba do ba do ba do ba, because it's like it's like different division of the beat, and it makes you feel like you're kind of like falling into the next beat, which is pretty cool. And it's fun for dancing sometimes, which is why jazz was like a big deal in the early 20th century. So people were like, oh my god, I can dance to this. In this case, Goldfish is an electro swing group because they focus heavily on jazz elements. They also focus heavily on live instrumentation and vocals at times. Which is something that a lot of other electronic groups tend not to focus on. A lot of times you get the weird, you know, keyboardy, you know, just very electronic sounds that couldn't be made by a real, like, a wind or string instrument. But Goldfish mixes everything together. So you get guitars, you get saxophones, you get trumpets, you get singers, you get samples from other stuff, which I'll get into in a little bit. So it's really good, basically. A lot of really cool things that this group does. I'm a huge fan of them ever since I discovered them. And it's a shame, you know, people don't talk about them more, but here we are, I'm talking about them. Go check them out, but if you want to just keep watching, you can do that too. Goldfish was founded in 2005 in Cape Town, South Africa. It's probably why you've never heard of them, because they're based in South Africa. If you're in, you know, the US or Europe or Australia or something like that, then you probably haven't heard of it. But if you're in South Africa and you're like, oh, Goldfish, they're pretty cool, and I'd be yeah, they are pretty cool. I think a lot of times this is kind of a digression, but then we'll move on. I think a lot of times people focus too much on American-based artists, and I think it's cool that, you know, international artists can get global appeal in the same way many American artists do. I think that's really cool. And then obviously British artists have had a huge influence on music history as well. I just think it'd be nice to, you know, have further international diversity of music. So Goldfish is from South Africa. It's formed by 2 white guys, Dominic Peters, David Poole. They've been working together for a while. I think they did like music projects in university. I think that's accurate. I might be wrong. So first off, what's the point of this video, right? Before we even get into these 4 albums, these 4 records here, I mean, they're not records, they're CDs, but you know, before we even get into that, what is the point of this video? Why are we here? Why are we talking about Goldfish? Well, one, they're a really cool band, but the 3 main points I want to talk about here today, one, I want to talk about how a change in sound can affect a feel and tone of artist's music. Now, I mean, every artist, or every artist that you know has been around for a decent amount of time tends to go through some sound changes, and there's a few reasons why. I mean, if you make the same thing over and over again, then not only are you, the artist, going to get bored, but your audience is probably going to get bored with it too. So it's nice to have a change in sound every once in a while, to keep things interesting. But a lot of times a change in sound can also polarize your audience and cause them to turn away from your music because you've strayed too far from what made you good in the first place. So we're going to be talking about a change in sound, a change in a band's or a group's sound and tone. The second thing, we want to look at song structure, not strong structure, song structure, and see how it's changed throughout their discography, and And they do some really interesting things with song structure throughout their career. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the changes in it and how it can negatively or positively affect their music. And then the last one, which is, if I do more of these, then this will be always one of the main points of the video, is to establish the strengths and the weaknesses of the group and suggest, where they should go in the future. Goldfish is supposedly releasing a 5th album this year called Deep in the Night. So, if you're watching this after the record's come out, obviously have not listened to it because it does not exist yet, but we're going to suggest maybe some things that they could do on this record to, improve their sound or maybe just do more interesting things. Before we get into the 4 albums themselves, I want to talk about the difference between IDM and EDM. These are terms that musicians themselves tend to not like. And the reason why is because the E in EDM stands for electronic dance music, and the I in IDM stands for intelligent dance music. And these are problematic terms because it's not as if intelligent dance music isn't electronic, because it is, and it isn't as if electronic dance music can't also be intelligent, because most music, it has some level of intellect behind it, or people wouldn't really listen to it. But I want to, before we get there, replace the I in intelligent dance music with the word introspective instead, because I think it's a bit more accurate for not only what I'm talking about, but I think what most people are referring to in these instances. If you're talking about like a spectrum between electronic dance music and intelligent dance music, or in this case, introspective dance music, EDM is firmly more on the loud, boomy, club vibe, where it's like, very loud, very focused on hooks, and something that you would actively want to dance or jump around to. It's the thing that most people associate with electronic dance music. That obviously this is a spectrum, so that doesn't mean that you can either be full EDM or full IDM. Obviously you can fit somewhere in the middle as well, and I would say Goldfish tends to do that. On the IDM spectrum, that's much more, like I said, introspective, atmospheric, a focus on, the color and the sound of a work, and it's more of a bop your head kind of situation generally, even though maybe in some cases you might dance to IDM as well, since it is in fact a form of dance music. So when you think of EDM, you think of Skrillex, and when you think of IDM, you think of Aphex Twin. I'm using very, very well-known artists to hopefully illustrate that point as best as possible. For example, Skrillex is a dubstep artist, but dubstep can also be IDM, believe it or not. I mean, if you think of Skrillex as dubstep, you'd be like, there's no way. But dubstep is actually one of the most common classifications for IDM, believe it or not. So dubstep can fit across the entire spectrum. House is something that definitely fits more on the EDM side of things, but Daft Punk I wouldn't say is full on EDM, or at least didn't get full EDM until later on in their career. Things like the albums like Discovery, or if you want to go even further back, like Homework, those maybe are more towards the middle of the spectrum, or even in some cases may lean towards the IDM side. The reason why I want to talk about those two terms, we're going to reference them later on. My chair is squeaky, and Goldfish goes across this spectrum throughout the career, so we're going to talk about where these albums kind of fit on this spectrum when we're talking about sound and stuff. Caught in the Loop released in 2006, late 2006 or so. The band was formed in like 2005, got an album to make the record and release it. 2006. This album was not very successful. It did not really do much for them, but it did put them on the map, and they were able to open for larger artists in the region after releasing this record and receiving some level of acclaim. What is this album? This is the IDM Goldfish album. This fits firmly in the IDM side of the spectrum. Maybe not all the way over, but very much so. And the reason why I say not all the way over is there are some tracks on here that lean more EDM at times. They're more bouncy, they're more dance oriented rather than like bop your head atmospheric. But largely this album is focused on tone and color, and more of that kind of situation. The tracks don't really flow into each other, per se, but because there's this homogenized sound that goes throughout, and that doesn't mean it is interesting because it's homogenized, because I find it extremely interesting, but because it's homogenized, it almost feels as if the tracks flow into one another. So, let's listen to a little sample of the record. I'll sample a track or two, maybe. I don't know what post-production me is gonna do, but let him take over.
We are one ever.
Nothing that you would want to get up and like really, get up and move your hips or whatever, move around to. But it still has that dance music element to it, which is why it fits more on the IDM side. Now, with that, we're going to analyze 2 tracks from this album. I want to talk about 2 tracks, because we're going to be talking about elements from these tracks and how those aspects have changed throughout their career. So the first track we're going to look at is Mbira Beat. Looking at the back of the CD case, it's the 4th track on the album. I don't know whether it's pronounced Mbira or not, but it's spelled Mbira, so I'm not sure whether that's the way you pronounce it, but that's what we're rolling with. Let's hear a little bit of that. So, in the sample that you heard, you might have noticed a short melody that's repeating throughout the track. This is called a leitmotif. Some musicologists will use the term motive, but that's something that personally really bugs me because, coming from a writing background as well, when you're analyzing books, it's a motif, and in music, it should also be a motif. And in this case, it's a leitmotif because it's a very short melody that is constantly repeated. And the leitmotifs have existed in music since forever, because those are the things that get stuck in your head more often than not. If you're thinking leitmotif in classical music, like for example, ba-ba-ba-bum, ba-ba-ba-bum, like that's a leitmotif, and that is repeated throughout that entire symphony. So in this case, the leitmotif is established in that melody, and then that leitmotif carries on for about a minute with some background elements starting to fade in and fade out, and so on and so forth, throughout that minute to keep things interesting. It's not like it's just this melody, because that would get boring. The best way to explain it would be, if you've ever used audio equipment or even lighting equipment, you would know about faders. And faders are these basically tools that you use to basically bring up the level of a particular thing. So in lighting, it's the brightness of the light. In sound, it's the loudness or volume of the sound that is there. So imagine, for instance, that this leitmotif that we're talking about is on, the first fader of this, board that we're talking about, right? So on the first fader is this leitmotif, and it's just rolling, right? It's just going, it's full blast, it's the main thing you want to listen to, right? And sometimes the volume might go down a little bit, generally, full blast. But what they're doing, let's say they're doing this live performance, right? That isn't exactly how it works with studio production, but let's just, for the sake of reference, say this is a live performance. You have maybe 5 or 6 other faders that have background elements that are constantly on loop, right? And that might be a different melody, a counter melody. In this case, it's usually very simple melodic structures because you don't want to take away from the main thing. So imagine that those things are on loop, and then the person in charge of it, so like Dominic or David or whatever, whoever it is, is behind there, and he's pulling up some tracks and then pulling them down and up and down, and all those faders are going up and down seemingly at random. But it maintains your interest because you don't know what sounds are going to come up next. Now, I said that this only goes on for about a minute, and the reason why is because a minute in, it changes. The melody is completely different. So let's hear this other melody. So this melody we're going to call the B melody, and this is because in most song structure analysis, generally people use letters to refer to the different melodies that exist. And depending on what you're focusing on, you can do this in different ways, of course, but generally speaking, if the melodic structure, if we're talking the notes, you know what I mean, if that remains the same regardless of any background elements or counter melodies, something like that, you'll generally refer to it by the same letter. So the first one we're going to refer to as the A melody, and this one we're going to refer to as the B melody. And you know, when you're doing like more in-depth analysis, you might put a prime after an A or a B, or a two prime, you know, a double prime or something like that, depending on if there's something different about this melody that's worth noting in your analysis. In this case, I don't really want to mess with primes, so because of that, it's going to be very surface level song structure analysis here, but that's fine. Around 1 minute in, it switches to the B melody, and the rest of the song alternates between these two, but it's a different amount of time before it switches. It isn't like when you hit 2 minutes, we go back to the A melody. When you hit 3 minutes, you go back to the B melody. Both of these melodies last around 20 seconds or so before they're repeated. So if that's the case, then here is I'm going to read to you the song structure of the structure of this song, and you're going to be like, what is this? It's A B B A B B B A B B B B B. That is weird, but it's amazing. Because it, like I said, it kind of like playing with the faders and fading in the background noise, you don't know when the melody's gonna switch. And when you're introduced to the two, you know it's probably gonna go back to the first one. And you know this because most songs follow a verse-chorus structure, which means that it's A, B, maybe a B again, maybe there's a bridge in there, which would be a C, but generally, you go back to the chorus, you know, after a verse. So the fact that it's like, oh, we're just gonna repeat this one like 3 times and this one 2 times, that's weird. That doesn't happen in traditional, you know, pop music. And so because of that, it maintains your interest. It's different, it's exciting, that's cool. So this doesn't have any vocals or anything that you're singing along to, but it maintains your interest because you don't know when that switch is gonna happen, and that's pretty neat. So that's Mbira Beat anyway. So next we're gonna talk about the song All Night, which is this track that follows Mbira Beat actually directly, but it's much more of a dance song. It's got vocals, it's got the verse chorus song structure. Let's give it a quick listen. Yeah.
Everyone has all day, all night.
So, I'll just say it straight up. This song is more indicative of the kind of music the Goldfish will produce later in their career. And it follows a much more simple verse-chorus bridge setup. So, like I said, if you have a bridge in there, the bridge in this case is fully musical, but like I said, we're focusing strictly on the music, not the vocals in this case. But the music is structurally basic as it is because of the vocals. Because imagine if it was like A, B, 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 A, you know, all that nonsense. It'd be really hard to write vocals for it without repeating the vocal, like the verse again or something like that. And that isn't very exciting. Most people are into a chorus, which they already expect, or a refrain, which they already expect, but then the verse is being something completely different, bringing a whole new meaning to the lyrics of the song. Because that's a very simple song structure, we got A as a verse, B the chorus, A the verse, B the chorus, repeat the chorus again because, you know, it's catchy, why not? And then you got a bridge, and then you go back to the chorus, right? And there's definite sound changes between those, so that's why we're using different letters for it. You might be wondering why did I say something so blatantly obvious, and you'll understand when we get to later records. That's all I really want to talk about with this album. So what is this? It focuses on sound over all else. It focuses on ambience and sound over all else, but it makes it interesting and varied by changing up that song structure every now and again. And of course, you know, you got your vocals in some of the tracks as well. But because it changes things up with the song structure while maintaining that sort of homogenized sound throughout, it makes for a very good listen, something that I quite enjoy. Definitely check out this record if you haven't already. I'm going to be saying that with like all of these. So, and then the other thing maybe too is the songs that don't have vocals obviously have more complex song structures. So, the next one is Perceptions, of Pacha, released in 2008. And then it was remade again in 2009 with a few bonus tracks added onto it. Those are mostly like, you know, remixes of the tracks on the album. So you don't really need the deluxe version of this record to enjoy it. Just get a copy of this record because this is my favorite Goldfish record. This won awards. Isn't that crazy? It won a Best Engineering and Best Dance Album Award at the 15th South African Music Awards, and it also got the most nominations, set a record for most nominations at the time. So this record killed it. This really blew them into cyberspace in the region, and did some really good stuff for them. So now they weren't the opening act, they were the act that people were going to see because people really liked this album and they wanted to hear them play it live. We're gonna listen to some stuff. We're gonna listen to, oh, I need to flip the notes over this way. Oh my goodness, we're flipping the notes over this way. We're gonna listen to Sold My Soul. It's the first track on this album. Let's give it a quick little listen here. That's the leitmotif of the song. There is no AABB stuff on this song. It is strictly focused on this leitmotif. But the thing that is really cool about this, before I get back to the song structure stuff, is the vocals in the background. These are sampled vocals from traditional African music. I think that's amazing. I think that's a nice. This might sound weird coming out. It adds a nice cultural touch to the record. And I don't mean that in like a dismissive way. I don't know. I like the elements that showcase, the culture which the music comes from. I just wanted to point that out. I have no idea where it's sampled from. I don't know much about traditional African music. So if anyone listens to this track and knows where that sample's from, that'd be really cool, because I couldn't find it anywhere. Like I said, the song structure is deceptively simple, and I say deceptively simple because despite being a fairly lengthy track, and despite it still only focuses on the one leitmotif. So let's go back to our little fader analogy real quick. If there's like multiple faders, imagine then, instead of it being like 5 faders, imagine they have like a bazillion faders, right? And only one of them has this leitmotif, and that just keeps going, right? But the thing is, maybe there's like 2 faders that more represent the melody in full, because what they do sometimes, and this is awesome what they do, is they like cut out part of the melody to like change it up and make it interesting. So like you won't always hear the full thing all the time, and it's really cool because it's like that plays with your expectations as well. And if you haven't figured out, like the goal of music at times is to play with your expectations in some way, unless you're listening to like freaking doom metal or something like that. But then even in doom metal, right, or something like that, then like when they change the note, then that's playing with your expectations. So music is predicated basically on playing with your expectations. And then they also have like a infinite other faders for all these background elements that come in and out, including the native lyrics, but also including a bunch of other things as well, which is why it maintains your interest throughout the entire track, and I think that's really cool. This album here, going back to the album as a whole, it's more about the overall sound than necessarily changing song structure and playing with things like that. So that's the main difference between this and Caught in the Loop. There are songs that have vocals on here. There's a lot more songs that have vocals on here than on Caught in the Loop. And I want to look at 2 of the songs that have lyrics on them today. The first one I want to look at is Fort Knox. Let's give that a quick listen. So at first glance, right, you might be like, oh, this song follows a very basic song structure. It's kind of like All Night in Caught in the Loop. But that's where I'm going to prove you wrong with some analysis for you. Here, are you ready to hear the structural analysis of Fort Knox? It's A. I don't know how many A's it is, but it's just A. There's no B. What? That's crazy. How does it do it and fit into a verse-chorus structure? That's a good question. Let's do this. Let's overlay the chorus over top of a verse. The vocals are gonna sound stupid, but listen to how it fits together with the instruments in the background. Go.
Breaking to the system. These walls between us are just way too high. What you feel the present, the heat, 7 colors flashing in your eyes.
You can see that this is actually not a ABA verse chorus structure. It's actually the same thing that Sold My Soul did. So what they're doing, and it's awesome, is they have like multiple faders, right, for different parts of the melody. So let's say they have like 2 or 3 faders for different parts of the melody. They have all those background elements, right? They have the vocals on one fader or something like that, right? But what they do is they have like all 3 faders up at some points, and then like during the verse, you know, they're like, oh, let's get rid of this part of the full melody. And then in the chorus, they're like, we'll get rid of this part and then bring this part up. And it's cool because it's like, it's the same overarching thing. It plays with your expectations, but it doesn't completely shift into the verse chorus structure. So it's like when you're in the verse, you're like still thinking, you could still like sing the chorus over it. The other one track I wanted to look at that has vocals, the soundtracks and comebacks, because towards the end they don't really have vocals as much. So I'm gonna do a quick overlay thing with that, and you might be able to notice it a bit better. So I'll play, you know, a piece of one part, a piece of another part. One will be from like a verse, one will be from like the chorus, and then I'll play 2 instrumental parts over top of each other and show you how it all layers on top of it.
I wanna take you to a place not very far from here. I don't have to travel for a week to let down your head.
The song structure of this is deceptively simple, but because they're playing with all these different sounds and basically, like, I'm going to use the faders term throughout this entire video, playing with the faders in that way, then it maintains interest with the vocals. So now the difference between this and Caught in the Loop is Caught in the Loop did some really interesting stuff with the instrumental tracks, but reverted back to like generic song structure when you introduce vocals. Here, they do the same thing throughout the entire album. That's what I really like about this album. That's why this one's my favorite of the bunch. That isn't to say that any of these albums couldn't be your favorite. There's one that I would say hopefully isn't your favorite, but if it is, then more power to you. There's one other notable thing I wanted to talk about before we moved on, however, and that's music videos. So Goldfish has a YouTube channel, Goldfish Live, if you want to check it out. And they didn't really have many music videos, if any, for Caught in the Loop. But when you get into Perceptions of Pacha, you start making music videos. And you might notice that some of their music videos on their YouTube channel have a decent amount of exposure, decent amount of views. Not like, you know, tens of millions, but, you know, there's some that pass 1 million, and that's pretty cool. It went up by the time you get to the 3rd record, which I'll introduce now, I suppose. Get Busy Living. It's a really cool album cover too. The reason why I wanted to bring up music videos is because the single from this track, the single track from this album, which is also called Get Busy Living, has an awesome, freaking amazing music video, and I suggest you check it out because I mean, this is complete divergence from the main topics I'm talking about in this video, but it's a suitcase love story. It's a suitcase love story. You can't get that anywhere else. And the cool thing also with their music videos is they basically have a Goldfish character, and then they introduce a bunch of other characters in their music videos that recur throughout all of them. And so it's like they kind of have their own personality, and you get used to it, and it's really cool. So yeah, that's pretty neat. In this album, it released in 2010. It received Best Global Dance Album at the 17th South African Music Awards, and it was nominated for Album of the Year. That's crazy. This is nominated for Album of the Year. That's insanity. I mean, yes, this is in the South African region. It doesn't matter. Like, regionally speaking, that was nominated for Album of the Year. That means this is a damn good album. And I would agree it's a damn good album. I don't like it as much as the previous one, but it follows a lot of the very similar ideas as the previous album. I would say the difference is that this symbolizes more of the transition from IDM to EDM. We're more on the EDM side of the spectrum at this point. That doesn't mean that they don't focus on homogenized sound. And I would say they focus on it less, most certainly, but it definitely fits more on the EDM side of things. The real song I want to talk about is my favorite track, and probably their most well-known track as well, We Come Together. But the thing is that the song on the album cut of this song is different from the one you hear in the music video. And it was released as a single after the album was released, and that sound is different from the album, and it's the one in the music video. So we're going to compare these two sounds and show where maybe I prefer one over the other personally. What we're gonna do is we're gonna listen to the original album cut, a piece of the original album cut, and then I'm gonna like transition it over into the single cut, and you're gonna hear the difference, and you're gonna be like, whoa. I don't know whether that's gonna be a good whoa or a bad whoa, but
We come together, no matter the weather. We're gonna love each other till the end of time. Whoa, oh, oh. Till the end of time. Whoa, oh, oh. Oh, oh. When we come together, no matter the weather. We're gonna love each other till the end of time. Whoa, oh, oh. Till the end of time. Whoa, oh, oh. Are you ready?
so that single version of the song is called the fishy beat version, and that's because of the fishy beat, you know, and they're like that beat that you very clearly heard in the single version that wasn't in the album version of We Come Together. That's the fishy beat, and this fishy beat is I don't like it at all. It drowns out the melody that is played in the piano. Like if you heard in the original album version, they had the doom ba 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 doom ba dum ba da 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 da. I mean, I'm not singing it very well. I could pull down the keyboard I have over there. I'm not gonna do that. That was the melody that was in the album version, and the fishy beat, in my opinion, kind of covers it up to the point that you can't even really hear it. Like, you have to try and hear the piano a lot of times. It's not like a terrible mix. It's just that I prefer the album version monumentally because of the fact that it focuses more on the live instruments than the fishy beat, if you will. I think in terms of this analysis, I think the best way to describe it is the fishy beat is much more EDM, where the original version is much more not necessarily IDM. Like, it's not over on that side of the spectrum necessarily, but I think the fishy beat leans more towards typical EDM production sensibilities, whereas the album cut doesn't. And I think I like the album cut more because it doesn't. I do want to quickly say, I like the closer of this album. This album didn't open in the same way as the prior two records. So, like, the prior two records, you'd have an opener and a closer, and both of these would be instrumental tracks, kind of like Sold My Soul, where, it kind of, like, fades in and focuses on a leitmotif, and you got some of, like, the samples of traditional African music. It creates this sort of I want to say like a mountain almost of excitement throughout the album. What I mean by that is, like, if you were to have a graph, right? If you were to graph the grandness, or perhaps let's go with grandness, it's the best term, throughout the record, then like it starts kind of mellow, and then it gets more exciting, and then around the halfway point it's most exciting, right? And then it dips down towards the end. And there's a benefit to this design because it adds a level of cohesion that might not be there otherwise. In a lot of records that they don't really go with that design. Usually what happens is you start with a track that's really captivating and exciting to hook you into listening to the rest of the album. And then, from there, it might dip down and then back up, and then usually either ends with a banger or ends, and not like a whimper, but, like kind of fades out gracefully in that way. So either you're getting like, you get a hill or like a mountain design, and then you get like, I'll call like the ski slope design, I guess. This is not a technical term, where it like starts with a banger and then, gets less exciting and then more exciting, then fades out. And then you have the, canyon design, where it's like, it starts exciting, it ends exciting, and then it's like, kind of like just less exciting in the middle. Not necessarily less good. Those graphs are not a representation of quality. It's more of the level of excitement. Because like I said, these openers and closers in the first two albums are some of my favorite tracks. But it's definitely more of a ski slope design here, for better or for worse. Because the opener is Crunchy Joe, and that's like really groovy, and like, I like the song a lot, but it's not a track that Goldfish would historically have opened with, as demonstrated in their prior two albums. So, that's really all I gotta say about this album. This album is probably, the most, I'm not gonna say most successful, but it's probably the one that most people know if they happen to know Goldfish. That isn't to say that this fourth album here didn't, also get a lot of acclaim, and that's 3 Second Memory, which is an album that I think represents, an abandonment, not necessarily full abandonment, but just straying away from the things that I think make Goldfish unique or strong as a group. This album is a full-on canyon design, so it's a full inversion of the design, like the track design. I mean, like the layout of the tracks, arrangement of the tracks throughout the album, where it starts and ends with bangers. So we're talking 3 Second Memory is a banger, Woman's the Devil is a banger, and then in the middle you get the more mellowed out tracks, which I actually think are the strongest parts of this album, and that would be like things like Giant Leap, Moonwalk Away, Trees and Jets, Driving Back to Darkness, and then it gets more exciting towards the end. So it's a full inversion, basically, of the design you saw in Caught in the Loop, where a song like All Night is track number 5. It's smack dab in the middle. So this is a little bit different from those in that way. But I think the thing is that even when you get into the less exciting tracks with this album, they don't follow the song structure that the older albums succeeded with. I'm talking specifically about Perception of the Pacha and Get Busy Living, where it's like I was saying, the song structure is like A, but they have those faders, and they're like fading them in and out, and have a bunch of different tracks that are doing different things that are more prevalent or less prevalent. You see that in Followers That Beat a little bit, which I like that track quite a lot. But if you're talking like the bangers on the album, if you will, it's much more representative of the typical verse, chorus, bridge setup that you see in a lot of pop music. So we'll take a listen to one of those songs right now.
No, is it right? Gotta break down the door. Gave it away for the world free to use. Then suddenly I got 1 million views. My video made the news.
It's definitely more pop production sensibilities here, which, for better or for worse, I mean, it definitely opened them up to a wider audience. Goldfish is probably more successful now than they ever have been, which might incentivize them to continue the path that this album's kind of forged for them in the future. My thing is I really do like the older sound a bit better, and I think when you get used to the older sound, I think this is seen as sort of an abandonment of those ideologies, and it's definitely more typical EDM. I don't think Goldfish stands out on this album like they stood out with their older ones. Now my favorite track on here is Moonwalk Away, just because of its more similar production sensibilities to the kind of thing that you would hear on the earlier records, especially in terms of song structure. So let's give a listen to that real quick. Now, I do want to mention that while this song, from a structural standpoint, is somewhat similar to the older albums, it definitely features a lot less of the live instrumentation and some of the more jazzy elements that defined them earlier on, right? You don't really hear much of that on this track. It's definitely mostly focused on keyboard and synths. Nothing necessarily wrong with that, because keyboard and synths can definitely mellow out a track, and this is definitely a more like chilled out track. But I think it's definitely worth noting that one of the there's definitely tracks that feature live instruments, but I just feel like they're less important to this album than it was in the prior ones, which I don't know. I guess I just don't like it as much. And this album also is a representation of them getting more universal appeal worldwide. When we're going back to Get Busy Living, the single version of We Come Together was released in 2011, and then there was a vinyl record released simply titled Goldfish, which is a compilation of some of the singles from the first 3 albums all on one record, and that was released internationally with the goal of basically getting wider appeal. And then this album was also released internationally in that way. So I think that it's almost like their older work is somewhat being dismissed from a marketing standpoint, and they're trying to push towards a wider appeal by making their production more pop music-y. And that's kind of the big issue, I guess, I have with the modern stuff. I'm gonna pick them back up. This is the 4 albums we got, and I'll just give a quick refresher, I guess. Caught in the Loop, very IDM sensibilities. More chilled out. Definitely feels like a cohesive project, even though the tracks don't really flow into each other. And while there were some EDM-y kind of songs that kind of hinted at what comes later, the main focus here is on unique song structure and live instrumentation, which I think works to this album's strength. Perceptions of Pacha abandons the song structure stuff, but instead focuses on playing with your expectations with regards to different instruments and different elements being added to a particular melody, which is something that I think suits electronic music very well and suits this group very well. And then Get Busy Living, you got more vocal tracks, some more typical verse-chorus stuff, but very similar to Perceptions of Pacha in many ways. And then you have the complete abandonment of that ideology with 3-second memory, more of a regression to typical pop production sensibilities. So what comes next? Well, there's, like I said, a new album that will be coming out called Deep of the Night, coming out this year, and they released a single from it, also titled Deep from the Night. Let's give that a listen. And this song is definitely more chilled out. It's not a total banger, but it definitely follows the same sort of structure that we've seen in 3-second memory. And so, if the rest of the album's like this, I'm worried it'll kind of blend in with 3-second memory, not really do anything interesting or forge a new sound or anything like that. Like I said at the beginning of the video, a sound change isn't necessarily a bad thing, and if you make the same album over and over and over again, then you're going to tire out yourself, but you're also going to tire out your audience. So I don't necessarily think they should be like, oh, let's make Perceptions of Pacha again, or Get Busy Living again. Instead, I think they should forge a new direction, but I think they should look back at some of the elements of their older albums and maybe see if they can do new things with them instead of just regressing to the typical song structure and sound that we're used to from electronic music nowadays. So, if you haven't checked out Goldfish, go check them out. They're a really interesting group, and I really enjoy them. Whether I do this kind of thing again with a different artist, I have no idea. We'll figure that out. I hope I, do it again, but once again, it really comes down to whether something comes to me and I want to talk about it. But I had a lot of fun doing this, even though spoilers, this room is not well lit. That's why this footage is so grainy. The camera's not the best. It died 3 times throughout this recording. Hopefully you didn't notice that, because it should look like one cohesive project. But it was a good time. So, thank you for watching this whole thing through. I have no idea how long it'll end up being. And, I'll see you in the next thing that I do. Buddy got an old man, poor man, walking through the street, gonna be on the world someday. Got mud on your face, a big disgrace, kicking your can all over the place, singing we will rock you.